Okay, so I think we can start. Your Excellencies, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, I welcome you all to this international webinar, which will deal with the question of global governance in our troubled world today. My name is Hussein Askary. I am the Vice Chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and I will have the honor of moderating this webinar. On September 1st this year, China's President Xi Jinping proposed a global governance initiative during the summit meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization held in Tianjin, China. Looking at the initiative and the explanations provided by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we find that many aspects of the initiative resemble some of those embedded in the 1945 United Nations Charter, China's own 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence from 1955, and the Asia-Africa Conference of 1955 and its Guangdong Declaration. These include the equal sovereignty, independence, and equality among nations. Non-interference in internal affairs and non-aggression are among the principles too. So what is new in this initiative in terms of global governance, and why is it important to revive it now? So this is what we are going to discuss today to find answers during this webinar. So we have a very distinguished list of speakers, including former European ministers, UN senior officials, and renowned scholars. To start with, it would be most appropriate to give the word to a representative from China. So we are privileged to have with us Mr. Wang Degang, the Chargé d'Affaires and ad interim of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Sweden, to give the keynote speech. So Mr. Wang, the floor is yours.
Morning, Hussein. Good morning, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay, so dear colleagues and friends, it gives me great pleasure to attend today's webinar, so organized by BRIX, and share my viewpoints on the global governance. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War, and also the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, as we all know. 80 years ago, after drawing hard lessons from the 2 world wars, the international community established the United Nations, ushering in a new era of global governance. However, 80 years later, the world is still far from being tranquil. Hegemonism, unilateralism, and protectionism continue to haunt us. The UN and multilateralism are being challenged. The number of armed conflicts worldwide has reached its highest level since World War II. The progress of human development has severely slowed down. More than 100 million people are displaced, and over 600 million are struggling with hunger. Confronted with the emerging global risks and challenges, we cannot help but ask, what has happened to the global governance system, and what shall we do? At present, transformation not seen in a century is accelerating across the world. The current international landscape is undergoing changes and turbulence. The deficit in global governance continues to grow. They all point to 3 deficiencies in the existing international institutions. First, the serious underrepresentation of the global South. The historical injustice long endured by emerging markets and developing countries have not been adequately readjusted. Second, erosion of authoritativeness. Certain countries adhere to the law of the jungle where might makes right, and the strong prey on the weak. They frequently abandon international organizations and agreements, wantonly cut off funding, and impose their own rules on others. Multilateralism faces serious challenges like never before. Third, urgent need for greater effectiveness. The Sustainable Development Goals Report 2025 finds that by this year, nearly half of SDG targets are moving too slowly, and alarmingly, 18% are in reverse. Governance gaps exist in new frontiers, such as AI, cyberspace, and outer space, which limit the effectiveness of global governance. Strengthening global governance and advancing reforms to the global governance system have become an overriding trend. With a focus on the common interest of all humanity, as Hussein just now mentioned, the Chinese President, Mr. Xi Jinping, unveiled the Global Governance Initiative, the GGI, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Plus meeting in September. It answers the subject of our times, namely what kind of global governance system to build and how to reform and improve global governance. The GGI outlines the direction for reforming and improving the global governance system in 5 key areas. First, staying committed to sovereign equality and advocating the right of all countries to participate in, make decisions in, and benefit from the global governance process as equals. Second, staying committed to international rule of law, which must be applied equally and Third, staying committed to multilateralism and strengthening the role of the UN as the core platform. Fourth, staying committed to the people-centered approach and assuring that the people of every nation are the actors and beneficiaries of global governance. Fifth, staying committed to real outcomes and real actions and finding sustainable solutions. The GGI builds on the purposes and the principles of the UN Charter and responds to the needs of the world and the wishes of the people. Together with the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, the GGI promises much needed stability and provides certainty for this volatile world, and has received swift and clear support from more than 140 countries and international organizations. The 4 initiatives serve as the strategic guidance for jointly advancing the building of a community with a shared future for humanity. In upholding world peace and promoting common development, China is not only an active advocate, but also a steadfast practitioner. China is a responsible and a constructive force in global governance. We firmly support the central role of the UN, actively participates in the UN peacekeeping operations, keep to the Chinese way of resolving hotspot issues, and push for the establishment of the International Organization for Mediation, bringing new hope for world peace. We join hands with the Global South in uniting for strength and actively develop BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to contribute their fair share to the global governance mechanisms. We advocate and vigorously promote high-quality Belt and Road cooperation and have established platforms for open cooperation, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS New Development Bank, empowering and energizing common development and prosperity. We deeply engage in international cooperation to tackle climate change and advance sustainable development. And dear friends, as you know, so President Xi Jinping recently solemnly announced China's nationally determined contributions for 2035. We earnestly honor our commitments, rallying support and pouring strength in preserving our shared home planet. Earlier this month, the fourth plenary session of the 20th CPC Central Committee adopted recommendations for China's 15th five-year plan. It charts a grand blueprint for China's economic and social development in the next 5 years, as well as a promising vision for win-win cooperation between China and the rest of the world. It also makes important strategic plans for building a community with a shared future for humanity. A China steadily advancing modernization will provide greater stability and certainty into the global economy and the shared development. The Chinese side would like to work with other countries to hold high the banner of building a community with a shared future for humanity, and take the implementation of the GGI as our guidance to promote a more just and equitable global governance system, and move the world to a bright future of peace, security, prosperity, and progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. We appreciate your contribution. I think you have answered part of our question on what is new in this initiative, which is different than with the UN Charter and previous initiatives, and also why now. And I think the key words here are, or the key sentences are that we are witnessing changes not seen in 100 years, because the balance in the world has shifted, the economic development have spread over larger parts of the world. The centers of power are moving to Asia and to the East and the global South, and that requires a new look. And also we have seen what you mentioned, this problem of the law of the jungle, which we have seen manifest in the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza recently, the illegal attack on Iran, and the inability of the international community to find a peaceful solution to the crisis in Ukraine. So I think these are very, very important issues. Just one note for our guests, the participants in the webinar, that you may pose questions already now to the speakers, either on the chat or in the Q&A field you can see, and we will answer these questions respectively. We have a slight change in the program. We would like to invite the second speaker is Mr. Erik Solheim, former executive director of the UN Environmental Program. He's also the former Minister of Development of Norway and currently the Vice President of the International Green Belt and Road Coalition. So you are based globally, so wherever you are welcome to join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hussein. We obviously need a new global order. We desperately need a new global order because the old order is outdated. It was fundamentally biased. This was an old order which served a few powers in the West and didn't serve the global community. Look, the 19th century was dominated by the imperial colonial powers, United Kingdom and France. Basically, the entire world was colonies under these two nations. And the 20th century has been dominated by the United States of America in a very different way, but it was dominated by the US. And now we see the rise of the global south. The Chinese economy is larger than the American economy if you measure it in so-called PPP parities. India will be the third, or is already the third largest economy in the world if measured in this same way. So the global south is rising in a fantastic, beautiful, great way, which will serve humanity very, very well. There is a longing, particularly in Europe and the United States, for the old order because we believe it served us well. And it's true that it created some stability in Europe, but it's not true that it served humanity well. Brought us wars in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Korea. You can mention them all. Basically, all over Africa, there were wars where the Soviet Union supported one side and the Americans supported the other side. These were proxy wars. It's hard to think of any war in the decades of the so-called Cold War, which was not a proxy war. I mean, take Angola as an example. It was at the core a civil war of Angola between tribes of political leaders in the north and in the south of the country. And then all of a sudden, the United States discovered that one tribe was market liberalist, and the Soviet Union discovered that the other was Marxist-Leninist, and one was supported by the United States and South Africa, the party government, and the other by Cuba and the Soviet Union. There's nothing like that today. And there's a horrible civil war in Sudan, but it's not like China is supporting one faction there and the United States another faction. And this is a civil war between proxies of the two biggest powers of the day. So we are in a more fortunate situation, and we should not speak as if the old order was fair. It was not. It served the interest basically of the United States and some European powers, and we need a new global order. The new order, we cannot go into a situation of multipolarity, which is anarchy. That would be very dangerous. So we need an order, and I'll come back to what such an order will imply. But first, look, the United Nations, as an example, that's the most indispensable organization for a global order. It was founded in a completely different time. It was basically the brainchild of one person, the then President of the United States of America, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I mean, kudos to him. I mean, what he did was marvelous. He brought together a group of the smartest Americans, devising the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations, and brought basically the entire world into these institutions. But it was a completely different time. At that time, China was in a civil war between the communists and the Guangdong, between Mao Zedong on one side and Chiang Kai-shek on the other. India was still a colony under the United Kingdom. Vietnam and Algeria were part of France, and basically all of Africa were the colonies under one or the other power. So it was a completely different time. Added, of course, it was a time where the United States dominated the world in a way no power has done before or later. United States was at least 1/3, if not close to half of the global economy at the time. So it was a very different world, and the United Nations have not developed. It's still stuck in the institutions developed in 1945. For example, India, the most populous nation in the world, the fastest growing large economy in the world, and the third largest economy in the world, is not a member of the Security Council. Completely crazy. While United Kingdom and France, two now small European nations, both with around 60 million people, are permanent members of the Security Council. By the way, there is no African seat in the Security Council either, even if Africa by 2050 will be 2.5 billion people, by far the largest number of people in the world, and also the only part of the world where the population is drastically increasing. So the UN is stuck in the past. There is not one UN headquarters in Asia, not one. There are a couple in Africa, but not one. No UN headquarters in China, none in India, no one in Indonesia. Well, these are the 3 or the 4 largest nations in the world. When I came into UN Environment, I realized that we had more staff in UN Environment from Finland than from China or from India. We had 1 staff member from Indonesia, the 4th largest nation on planet Earth. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Finland. I love that nation. But because it's not reflecting the 21st century when there are more Finns than Indians or Chinese as staff of the UN Environment Program, and you find very similar dispositions in many other UN organizations. So the UN, as well as the global system, was made in a different time. It's outdated, but it was also fundamentally biased to the West. Now we need a new global system, and of course China is front and center in developing that, because China is the most powerful, most economically prosperous part of the global South, and has the power to, with others, not alone, but with others, to shape a new system. China comes with a very powerful example. No nation has brought more people out of poverty at such rapid time as China. No nations had transformed its economy so fast in a green direction as China. Look, 10 years ago, China was heavily polluted. Now China is wonderfully environment friendly. Added, China is dominant, totally dominant in every green sector. It's 90% of solar panels, but 60% of everything else, wind, hydropower, whatever you may mention. So China comes with an example, but of course, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, a number of other East Asian nations also have done or are doing largely the same. So it's not just China, but China is front and center in this development. China now is the #1 trade partner with 120 countries globally. China is a larger trade partner than the United States with 140 countries. Every single nation in Asia is trading more with China than with the US. Every nation in Africa, besides Lesotho, which is fairly small, is trading more with China than with the US. And even on the American continent, most of the large nations in South America is also trading more with China than with the US. So when you look to the example, power of the Chinese economy, and if I may add, the power of the Chinese soft power, it comes with enormous strength. We can help shaping the new global order. There's an enormous difference. All the big nations of the global South have largely been at peace in the last decades. China has not been involved in any war since 1979 with Vietnam. India has not been involved in any war except with his neighbor Pakistan. Brazil, Indonesia, never been involved in any external war at all. So all the major nations of the global South come with an ingrained peacefulness. Maybe if they become much more powerful, it will be different. I mean, no one can know, only history can judge on that. But at least for the last decades, the global South comes with peace, while United States of America, of course, has been involved in basically every war which has existed anywhere in the world in the last decades, either directly with troops or indirectly as a main sponsor of one of the parties to a war, like say Israel in the Middle East. So and Russia, of course, has also been in a number of wars. So nations, and France and the UK has been much smaller, but still been involved. And even my small nation, Norway, has been involved in failed wars. I mean, we stuck to the war in Afghanistan for 20 years, a complete failure. Should have gone out there after 1 or 2 years, but we couldn't find a way to get out. So if we add up all these factors, size of the Chinese economy, the Chinese example in poverty alleviation and green development, and the peaceful rise of China, as well as the peaceful rise of India and Indonesia and Brazil and other nations of South Africa, other nations in the global south. This is very important assets in making the new global world order. So towards the end, what should such a new world order encompass? What are the main components? And as the Chargé from the embassy in Stockholm very rightly set out, I mean, nearly all the main parts of a new global order are encompassed in the Global Governance Initiative by President Xi Jinping and in the other initiatives he has raised. But let me still phrase it in a somewhat different way, but it is the same. First, of course, the most important of all is to keep peace. The United Nations is not at the moment really set up to help bringing peace in the major conflicts of our time. But the most important of all is peace between the two main nations of the world, United States of America and China. All other wars are regional. They're horrible for people living in Gaza. I mean, we can watch on TV every day. It's horrible for people on the front line between Russia and Ukraine. We can also see on TV. Sudan is absolutely horrendous. But all these wars are regional. None of them are affecting people at other parts of the world. I mean, no automobile worker in China or no farmer in India or no fisherman in Norway is directly affected by any of these wars. In that sense, they are regional and localized. A war between China and the United States can hardly be localized. It will be absolutely horrendous for the world, and it must be avoided at all costs. That's why it is very good news that President Trump and President Xi are speaking. They spoke this week. A visit by Trump to China and a reciprocal visit from President Xi to the United States. We should all applaud. And better relations between China and the US in trade, in conflict resolution. I mean, if China were to be involved in the conflict resolution in Ukraine, maybe it could happen in a much better way. So we should applaud any contact between the two main powers. That's the basis for everything else. Secondly, a new order must be based on the acceptance that we respect the sovereignty of all nations. That means the sovereignty of Palestine as well as the sovereignty of Ukraine. Some people support only the sovereignty of Ukraine or only the sovereignty of Palestine. We need to accept both. That's not to say that there cannot be compromises, but the end result of these two conflicts must be a Palestinian state in the Middle East, as well as a functioning Ukrainian state with sovereignty, which can function. If we allow this to slip, there is no end. I mean, look, Africa, there are 54 nations. Basically, all borders are arbitrary. One tribe will be on one side of the border and the other side of the border. This was made by the Americans, sorry, not by the Americans, but by the French and Germans and Brits in the 18th century. But if you allow one political leader to claim the territory of the other, there is a recipe for endless wars. So we must respect the principle of sovereignty, and that's also the fundamental principle in the Global Governance Initiative by President Xi. Added, we must stop intervention in the internal affairs of other nations. Because maybe most important of all, the United States of America and China need to respect that they have different political systems. United States will never adopt a Chinese political system, even if they wanted, they cannot, because it's ingrained in Chinese culture for 2,500 years. But China will not adopt American political system also. I mean, very few Chinese want that to happen, but that's no difficulty that China and the West can work together on the basis of different systems. But we need to stop the United States of America has intervened in regime change operations is something like 80 nations in the last decades, toppling government, funding political parties of their like, supporting military coup, and in some cases even military interventions like in Vietnam or in Iraq. In most places it has failed. It even failed the interest of the United States, but nearly everywhere it has created more havoc, because you may, for example, dislike the government of Afghanistan. I'm no fan, obviously, of the policies to women of the Taliban in Afghanistan, but it cannot be changed from outside. It can only be changed by the Afghan people, and we need to stop these interference in the internal affairs of other nations. China is not interfering in other places. China did not have a candidate in the United States. It didn't support either Trump or Kamala Harris. It is ready to work with whoever wins the election in the United States. And China works with, yes, brutal dictators, authoritarian leaders, democratic leaders. It works with whoever is running a country and respect that. That is also, by the way, exactly the attitude of India, of Indonesia, of Brazil, of South Africa, of all the major powers in the global south. Only the United States of America and Russia are now interfering in the internal affairs of other nations in an inappropriate way. It must stop. Then we need a global trade regime which can work for all. It's not illegitimate to have tariffs. I mean, that may be necessary for some nations to protect domestic produce of some sort. So it's not that Trump is wrong to put tariffs. Tariffs are existing, but there must be a system. There must be rules. There must be a World Trade Organization which functions, where people can appeal when there are difficulties and find way of sorting out disputes. And the global system must be much more people-centered. That's very central to President Xi's initiative. I mean, I've worked in the UN. I can tell you the UN is not people-centered. The UN is procedure-centered, bureaucracy-centered, in a very bad way. There's very often endless discussions which have no focus on the people outside. And unless the global system work, yes, for the automobile work in
Sorry to
Shenzhen.
intervene. You have 1 more minute.
I'm coming to the exact end. Unless the global system is working for the African farmer, for the Chinese worker, Norwegian fisherman, it's of very little use because people demand results, improvements of their life, and that change need to happen. So to sum up, we need a new global system which can be more peace-oriented, more people-oriented, with respect for the sovereignty of all nations, with no interference in the internal affairs of others, and with rules for trade. And I believe that China and the other major nations of the global south will be the engine to make this happen, and they should have the support of all of us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solheim. It was really great to hear all these things. You have explained certain things. For example, why now we need a new global governance system, because the one we have had was built in a different time after World War II with different powers. And you pointed out that some structural shifts that have taken place in the world, but they are not reflected in the governance system. It's like the inequality of nations representation in the UN Security Council, for example. You mentioned the African Union is not represented, but also the UN bureaucracy itself is problematic because it does not reflect the diversity in the world. But also you mentioned the fact that economic development and trade are important issues to be included in this. But also you pointed out the way to go in the future is through diplomacy, and that even better relations between the United States and China, between Russia and the US and Europe is very, very crucial. And I think that's a very, very great contribution. I would like now to invite our next speaker, Dr. Pino Arlacchi, also with long experience in the United Nations, as a former member of the EU Parliament, former director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Dr. Pino Arlacchi is from Italy. I guess you are addressing us from Italy too, right? Welcome.
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Can you please lower the camera a little bit so we can see the...
Closer to the camera. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not in the optimal one.
Okay.
But
whatever you feel comfortable, that's fine.
Yes, very happy to contribute to this very important and full of content discussion that happens in the moment of the world in which we really need to introduce big changes on governance, on development, on security. And China has clearly good ideas. the three major proposals that China recently advanced are the right framework for building a more safe and prosperous world. We need now to do a step forward. This is a framework, but what we need is a set of proposals about the instruments through which implement this framework. Unfortunately, in this moment of transition, of an hegemonic transition, we do not have serious instruments because the UN, who used to be, should be the major instrument for global governance, particularly in the area of security and peace. UN is basically not existing. It is at the lowest moment in its history, and it is completely absent from major crises. Gaza, what did the UN in Gaza? It just suffered the destruction of UNRWA, suffered the complete imagination. What is doing the UN in Ukraine war, in which the tradition of peacekeeping of UN as a guarantee of security has been completely forgotten, in part because of the responsibility of the current UN leadership. I'm sorry to say that, but this leadership has been absolutely inadequate. And since next year we have the issue of changing the leadership, of having a new Secretary General, could be the opportunity to reflect on this failure and trying to make viable proposals, not for a UN reform. I'm not speaking about a UN reform. We need the reconstruction of the UN. We need the refoundation of the UN from the scratch, because the issue of UN reform became almost ridiculous. I entered the UN at the end of the 90s on the wave of Kofi Annan UN reform project, which was, after a few years, which was completely a failure, which was completely useless. What we need is to change the UN from scratch. It means that the weakest point of the UN is the issue of General Assembly and Security Council. We have, on one hand, an almost revolutionary principle of government, which is one country, one vote. Each country in the UN has one vote regardless of its strength, position, population, and so on. And on the other hand, we have the most undemocratic system of government. 5 countries who decide and who have basically all significant powers. This is a structural mistake. Thus, to be addressed. Otherwise, we'll continue for another 50 years discussing about reform of this, reform of that, reform of that. Oh, it is very clear that this structure cannot be reformed, should be radically changed. It means General Assembly should be a world assembly with all powers, like a national power. All powers, all jurisdiction and everything, working on majority and minority dynamics. Security Council should be simply abolished and replaced by a Council of Peace elected by a restricted number of countries, elected by the General Assembly, and with full, in some way, sovereignty of the world. Maybe concentrating his mandate on original mandate of the UN, which was the issue of aversion of war, promoting peace, and with strong instrument to propose peace, much stronger than today's instrument, much stronger. It means a stronger body in the UN, military body, under the command of the Secretary General and of the Council of Peace, that intervenes concretely and effectively in preventing not only attack, aggressions, but also threat of aggression. What we are now seeing in Venezuela with the United States, we see a huge country threatening to attack another country with no serious motivation, and then no one raised a finger. No one, everywhere. So, and is Venezuela today, tomorrow can be another 100 countries, bigger or smaller than Venezuela, that in a case like this, don't have any kind of protection. UN must be in place in this kind of situations, which can occur in a multipolar world. They occurred here in the past, but there was this myth of the world government guaranteed by the United States that in some way work as a substitution. Now, we do not have anymore these instruments, so we feel important vis-a-vis crisis. What I mean with the restructuring of the UN, a fully democratic body that intervene, preventing and promoting peace in all situations, and of course governed with the principle of majority and minority, which already exists in the United Nations. The General Assembly, since at least 10 years, is characterized by a majority and minority. We have a solid majority of 80–90% countries of the world who vote in a certain direction. And we have a minority that, unfortunately, are countries belonging to so-called West. They are in a regular minority. So, this is the situation. And we must have an appropriate reflection of this situation, a projection of these political situations in the issue of global governance. Otherwise, I don't see. The other solutions, they can be also parallel to this. It's not necessarily alternative to this, must be parallel. Is the building of a regional organization or not regional organization, countries that are concerned about the protection of their own security, that start to establish military agreements against aggression. Military agreements against aggression. Maybe not permanent military agreements like NATO, but there must be a way in which countries that do not have nuclear weapons, countries that do not want to become military powers, and I'm talking about 95% of countries of the world, have an instrument to protect themselves. What a country like Venezuela should do? Build nuclear weapons? I don't think this is a good solution. But I'm afraid that the underdog countries that could be in a situation like Venezuela, suddenly in a world, in a multipolar world, these countries will start to think about having nuclear weapons. So the risk that the non-proliferation treaty will be destroyed quickly by the first country who resigned from the treaty and start to build his own nuclear armaments, the risk is that in a few years we have a world, a nightmare, a world with 30, 40 countries with the nuclear weapons. This can be the guarantee, the paradoxical guarantee of world peace. But this is the worst possible outcome. If we break the nuclear taboo and each single country can do whatever he wants in terms of nuclear power, we are in the worst possible world. This was avoided with the treaty on nuclear weapons and with all the other treaty about nuclear experiments and so on. But it is very clear that this order is collapsing because of one single most important reason: the fact that the United States do not accept a peaceful decline, a peaceful future position in the family of the nation of the world. If this tendency of cruent decline will continue with Trump and with other presidents, we will be in the world will be in very serious tension. But I mean, the world in the meantime grew up, and I believe that the solutions I outlined can work if there is a political will and if there is a political awareness of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pino Arlacchi. It was very thought-provoking points you made. It's that it's not the United Nations. Its question is not to reform or restructure the United Nations, but to rebuild it from the ground. And that such institutions as the Security Council should be abolished and replaced by a more, we can call it democratic structure within the General Assembly. These are very interesting and challenging propositions because we have a power structure now in the world which does not accept the change that is taking place. And also you pointed out that the danger is also emanating paradoxically from the nuclear arsenals of the big powers, which are keeping things in balance in a way, but at the same time threatening our existence, what is called the mutually assured destruction preventive method. And this is really unacceptable for the rest of the humanity. And it's not a good solution, this balance of terror in the world to keep things quiet. So the very important points you make about reform. Thank you very much. We have Dr. Katrougalas is a bit late. We would have to give him some time, but I think we can move to our next speaker, Mr. Jan Oberg. He is the director of the Transnational International Peace Institute. And you may introduce yourself in the right way. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Hussein, and thank you for arranging this visionary, looking into the future, what can be done, because far too few, I think, conversations also on the net deals with what can be done. And how can things change for the better? And I used to say, it's a bad doctor you go to and he tells you that you're ill, but he has no idea about what to do with it. Far too many intellectuals and politicians have no idea about what can be done to make the world a better place. And I'm glad to hear that we've already had a number of suggestions here in this short time. So I'm Jan Oberg. I'm a peace and future researcher, a co-founder and director of the most independent you can think of, Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research in Lund, Sweden. We are exclusively people-financed, and we are only volunteers, 50 people around the world who works for the UN norm, Article 1, that peace shall be established by peaceful means, which all countries are violating. Simple as that. And we do this with a focus on how much better it would be if people learned something about conflicts and conflict management and peacemaking instead of using the weapons they have on the shelves. So let me start out by saying first, I think it's wonderful that China produces and disseminates these initiatives for a better world. The sad thing is that the West does not come up with anything like that. There's no kind of global dialogue between countries, and therefore we will have to have it between us, the people. And that's what we're doing today. I would like to address, depending on how long time, how fast I get, I would like to address two, perhaps three elephants in these rooms discussing the future of the world. And the most important to me as a peace and future researcher, and I can tell you our foundation has existed for 40 years on the 1st of January. We know a little bit about peace by peaceful means, also having been on the ground. We're not just doing theory. My big problem is that there will be no global government. There will be no better world. There will be no peace if we continue to conceive of security as based on offensive deterrence, basically national security with weapons, with the idea that you can steal from civil society 5% of the gross national product and waste it on arming against each other. Why is offensive deterrence a curse for humanity? And by the way, it's not addressed in any of the Chinese government initiatives. It is because the moment you say, I can kill you thousands of kilometers away with my long-range weapons, my security is to be able to kill you, means that there can never be stability, because the one you talk to by that implicitly with your long-range weapons will not feel safe with you. Then you add, like NATO, but we don't have the intention to. Now, you see, this is a fraud. This is intellectually BS. Because you cannot, when you see people as potential threats or enemies, like I can kill you if you don't do what I say, or if you do something I don't like you to do. The moment that happens, there can never be anything else but the one you talk to indirectly with your long-range weapons will say, oh, that means I'm threatened. That means I have to get more weapons. So if you ask me what the solution is, it's something that some of us have been working on exactly for 40 years now. It is defensive defense. It is, if there is deterrence in it, it means I will give you hell if you come to my territory or try to hurt me, but I cannot kill you far away. It means smaller mobile units if we talk military defense. It means less destructive power. And of course, it means no nuclear weapons. No nuclear weapons have nothing to do with security. They are human rights violation, because we should be allowed to live in a world without the threat of nuclear war. No country has ever had any referendum about its nuclear weapons, for good reasons. Nobody wants them. And secondly, you can't use it for defense, because you'd not like to use nuclear weapons on your own territory. Secondly, you can't use it for offense, because if you want to occupy a territory, you cannot use it as a radioactive desert. Now, people say they are only there to prevent from ever being used. That is nonsense, because a weapon that both parties or all parties know will never, ever be used is a weapon that cannot deter anything. So whenever they exist and they're used for deterrence, and as Hussein said, weapons of terror, then there is a risk that they will add to the propensity or the probability that there will be a nuclear war. And that is a very important point you made, Hussein, that nuclear weapons are built on terrorism. It is a deliberate killing of civilians. This is unacceptable in a future world in which we should cooperate and we should live together in peace, and we should think of each other as friends rather than enemies first. So there are lots of things you can learn, but I would say, isn't it remarkable that there's no government in the world who has a Ministry of Peace? There's no government in the world whose leaders have advisors who know anything about peace. They all have uniforms, green uniforms, or intellectual military uniforms. Isn't it remarkable that we have virtually no peace research at our universities in the East and West and North and South? Isn't it remarkable that we don't teach our children anything about how to solve conflicts? My point is simply, if we knew what conflict resolution is and peacemaking is, we would not need weapons to the same extent. We use weapons, east, west, north, and south, because we don't know anything. We are peace and conflict illiterate. So we have a huge task in front of us to come down from the trees and say, when we have conflicts, and there will always be conflicts, let's talk. Let's have methods for doing a solution which could lead to a much better relation, move from conflict to cooperation. This is a huge intellectual field that nobody deals with. So that's my first elephant. Let's talk about an alternative security. And that means if you're human-centered, then you talk about human security. And you move it up from human security to regional security to global security, not national security with military arms predominantly. And that's, of course, where the United Nations Charter is important. We can pull down the whole thing, and I agree with the former speaker. We need a revolution of the UN, if you will, not just reforms. But let me add one thing. It would be wonderful if United Nations members respected the UN. The biggest reform we can do with the UN is that member states begin to behave themselves according to the UN Charter. So that's the first point. Second point, global governments would have to, in my view, explore how to make democracy work at the global level. You see, the funny thing is we have a world in which economy is global, in which culture to a certain extent is global, in which the military is reaching globally, you know, America with 800 bases or whatever. But we don't have a political system that is global. We have a right as citizens to go and vote every 4th year or something like that on what happens in our capital. Now, this is ridiculous in a globalized world. We need to talk about global democracy. How do we democratize democracy at this level? How can we, through modern technology, through new ways of electing things, through new concepts of democracy, how can we make decisions at the global or regional and global level which citizens around the world are involved in? It's mind-boggling to me that we accept that the only influence we have is on our national parliaments or governments or whatever it is, but not higher up. I cannot even vote for who represents me in the United Nations. What about at least having votes, elections of our international representatives? What about having United Nations embassies in each member state? You know, you can go on like that. There's thousands of ideas we could discuss how to democratize democracy. Final thing I just want to say, and I'm getting emotional about it, I am sick and tired of people who say that what Trump does is a peace plan. Please stop misusing the word peace. These people don't know what it is. The plan for Gaza has nothing to do with peace. The plan now, whatever it contains, 21 points or 28 points or 48 points or 3 points for Ukraine will not create peace in Ukraine. It requires a completely different approach to what can be done, including taking in all parties, listening to all sides, asking the parties, what do you fear most and what can you live with in the future? There's no idea in this discussion at the moment that everybody calls a peace plan without thinking of what peace could be. There's no discussion about how to structure the future of Ukraine, Russia, and Europe in such a way that we could start cooperating and get out of the warfare. There's all chance that this will be a militarized peace with military security guarantees because this basic conflict is not solved. It's not even addressed. And the basic conflict here is not Russia, Ukraine. It is NATO's expansion against all promises given to Gorbachev that made Russia feel threatened. And then you can say did the wrong thing, that can be discussed. But we're talking about something much bigger if we want to make peace in Ukraine. I would see Ukraine's future as a new Switzerland, as a neutral state, as a country and a people that finally get some privileges for what they have suffered, both because of NATO's policies, US policies, and Russia's policies. Long story short, we need to rethink what we say is peace and how to get there. And I'm sorry, I feel that this is what the world needs to begin to discuss, not just, call everything that goes on. A ceasefire agreement or military security is not peace. Period. It's not peace. I can tell you what peace is, but that would be another lecture. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Jan Oberg. This was really interesting. Also, you have in your typical manner of posing paradoxes and ironies in the minds of your audience that make them think. Because what we define as peace, and I think you have done enormous amount of work on what is peace. People talk about peace in many trivial ways, but it's not, and you have made very key issues this question of, and I think it's also paradoxical for our friends in China, because what I don't know if you are thinking about what happened in the Tiananmen Square this year, all the exhibition of the defensive weapons, or what you may call, if this is a way of deterring others, is this a defensive strategy or otherwise? This is a big question because we have the question of peace through strength. We have heard many nations think this way too. They say if we are not powerful enough, we will be attacked, we will be subjugated and humiliated. So this is a big question. It's not so easy, but I think one of the most important points you made is we have to look at each others as humans and as friends. And I think this is
until the opposite is proved.
Yes, and we take the position, and it's very okay on this forum, in our forums, to be passionate about these things and emotional. That's all okay. We are not an academic institution, and these are matters of life and death for whole nations. So it's all. Thank you very, very much. I think on this note, on the question of being friends, and I think that we will still have to keep changing our program because some of our speakers are a bit delayed. My friend, Stephen Brawer, and the chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, he appreciates this point, I'm sure, about friendship and against pragmatism, that we might not like each other, but we should work together, but we are not friends. We hear this very often in Europe and Sweden. We say we want to work with China, but only pragmatically. We want to do business, but we don't want to be friends. And this is a very, very bad thing. I give the word to my friend and colleague, Stephen Brawer, who is addressing us from China right now.
Yeah, good morning to everyone. Good evening to my place right now in Gaoqing, in the area of Guangdong province. I will, as my colleague says, be speaking to you today from China. I want to thank our distinguished speakers, the Honorable Chargé d'Affaires, Mr. Wang Degang, Mr. Erik Solheim from Norway, Professor Pino Arlacchi from Italy, Professor George Katrougalas, who will appear a bit later. I was operating first on the idea that I would speak last. So from Greece, Mr. Jan Oberg from Sweden, and Professor Wang Yiwei from China. And of course, I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar sponsored by the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. All of you represent important voices promoting the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Governance Initiative. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world is presently facing a period of great turbulence, even turmoil in respects that we're witnessing daily. Yet the solution to these challenging times are also before us. The Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Governance Initiative establish a pathway and a direction for humanity leading towards peace and development and avoiding the horrors of war and conflict. It is a framework. It doesn't elaborate all the details, but it lays the framework of a strategic perspective which would, in fundamental ways, replace the old order that was identified by the first speaker, Mr. Erik Solheim, and others as a old system that no longer functions, even outdated from the time that it was initially put forth towards the end of the Second World War. The question, will humanity embrace a commitment for a community for a shared future for mankind, remains uncertain. The alternatives, the course of militarism and geopolitics, can only end in tragedy. The refusal on the part of Western Europe, the EU, and the United States to accept the rise of the global South and a multilateral world will only lead to their continued slide into collapse and self-destruction. In fact, the threat of a new militarism that is coming from Japan's present leadership and the European war hawks is only a clear sign of their economic demise, as well as their intellectual and moral decline and weakness. This is a very important point, that when militarism rises, it is a result of a deficiency in moral and intellectual wisdom that lays the foundation for how people from all different cultures and civilizations can interact in a manner which is conducive to global security and development for all of mankind. Nonetheless, the present situation poses an immediately extremely dangerous direction regarding humanity's future. What I want to emphasize is during my present trip here to China, I had the opportunity to speak at a conference which was entitled on the conference speech was on the significance of natural law in the digital intelligence age. This was a follow-up to an article published by China News Service recently in both Chinese and English. And I'm happy to report that my friend in the Chinese News Service informed me that in Chinese, my article has been seen by 500,000 people, as well as over several thousand likes of the article, which I have made available on our WeChat group for Europeans for the Belt and Road initiative. But without elaborating in great detail here, the key point that I raised is the importance of natural law as defined by the great European Renaissance thinker, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz's idea on natural law or ideas were directly opposed to the British imperial philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who advocated a law of the jungle as a policy, as a direction based on the assumption that human beings are basically bestial and interested in dominating one another in order to secure their own self-interests, egotistical self-interests. The strong dominate the weak. Now, Mr. Wang Degang has mentioned this problem in terms of the existence of what everyone here is well aware of, a unipolar world order, the so-called rules-based order where military influence and dominance not alone dominates, but removes individuals and leaders in the governments of the world who do not seem to follow their agenda, which is regime change, the opposite of the idea of respecting sovereignty as is being promoted by the Global Governance Initiative. The Leibniz's ideas are remarkably close in many respects to China's President Xi Jinping's Global Governance Initiative. They consist of a commitment to the common good, of the idea that human beings are not rotten, as Hobbes and the present underlying thinking process, which dominates the idea of a unipolar world, continues to impact in world affairs, which prevent the functioning of institutions like the United Nations, because no one has to respect it if it doesn't cohere with their own ideas of what their own self-interests are. Now, especially in Western Europe and the United States today, we desperately need an elevated concept of respect for sovereignty and the common good of mankind, a living, dynamic, and concept which could breathe new life into the UN Charter and the Peace of Westphalia. Together with the Global Governance Initiative, a new spirit of respect for others, the initial idea of the Peace of Westphalia, which was in principle operational until 1999, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair insisted that it was no longer relevant, it was outdated, and defined the policy of the right to intervene. And that has been the basis for not alone a unipolar world, but a regime change policy which has increased proxy wars and is presently threatening the very existence of mankind. So what I will say is that a spirit for respect and understanding of the actual depth of European Renaissance thinking, which did actually establish the best qualities of what at one time was the founding principles of European and at that time United States Republic, which is a European baby of Europe, that it will mean that we put an end to militarism and war hawks who are presently thriving on war, division, and geopolitics. Geopolitics, that is an almost underlying accepted premise that one's interest must necessarily contradict or in some way threaten the existence of another, so that power and security is defined not by the common good, but is defined by what represents the perceived interest of the particular power block. That idea of reality is no longer the fundamental basis for a proper basis for human society and human development to go forward, not alone in this century, but hopefully a vision into the many centuries that will follow. So we have to end geopolitics. We have to end the basis which allows geopolitics and militarism to show its ugly head. Let us go forward with the spirit of hope and cooperation and put an end to the policies which are threatening humanity's future at the present time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think this is a very important and passionate appeal to redefining many of the philosophical built-in ideas we have about ourselves as humans and others. It's like you make a contrast between natural law and the law of nature. You know, the law of nature, which you, as you defined, the Hobbesian view that humans are greedy, like animals, greedy, brutal, and violent, and they will only look for their own interest and not care about others. Geopolitics, as a zero-sum game, is born out of that, and that reality is a fight of all against all for the small pie. I think when President Xi Jinping says, let's not fight over a small pie, let's make the pie bigger, or bake more pies, many people in the West don't understand what he's talking about because they believe there's only one small pie we should fight around. And I think this brings us to the question of economic development and what defines really limited resources or not limited resources. And this is very, very important. Stephen and our other colleague, Gustav Lansner, have launched the Leibniz project, which to highlight the views and ideas of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a great German philosopher and polymath, who is very little known in Europe. And I think his ideas of dialogue with China, which he initiated already in the 18th century, should be revived. Our other speakers, Mr. Katrougalas, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, is a bit delayed. We are waiting for him, and also Professor Yang Yiwei from Beijing, Renmin University, also a little bit delayed. So I guess we can go to the some questions which have been raised by the audience. So if it's okay, we can start with a couple of them. There is a question, I think it's addressed more to both Mr. Erik Solheim. I think he had to catch a flight. He can't answer it, but also what Dr. Pino Arlacchi mentioned on the structure of the United Nations, but also Jan Oberg can answer. Anonymous participant says, what obstacles exist to reform or reconstruct the current UN institutions or charter? And what could be the potential risks to construct a new global governance institution, a transition period of chaos, anarchy, or a parallel build up inviting member countries in the fashion of BRICS plus? Or how would this transition look like? Is the GGI merely a push to reform or reconstruction of the United Nations? I think Dr. Pino may answer this question, or even Mr. Wang, if the Chinese proposal, as we heard, is not, it's a framework, it's a proposal, but it's not, definitely does not want to overthrow the existing global governance system of the United Nations, because as we heard, certain issues then don't get old, like the sovereignty and independence of nations, non-interference in internal affairs. So these are very important details that we need to understand. Dr. Pino, would you like to address this question of what is the transition period between what we have now, which is a dysfunctional UN system, and a reformed or reconstructed system? What happens in between? What are the obstacles which will prevent such a transition? You are muted. You are muted, Dr. Pino. Yes.
Now it's okay? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
The main obstacle is the political will of the great majority of the Great South, because the majority is there. The issues are there. On the major global issues, there is a coherent way, a coherent strategy of the Global South, which is expressed in the General Assembly resolution. I studied the most important 15 General Assembly resolutions in the last 5 years, and I saw that on the major issues, there is an incredibly coherent position of the 80–90% of the countries of the world. So we have a majority of 80% of countries of the world that has an idea about the future of the world. This coincides largely with the position of China and with the position of the actors themselves. No military solutions of big issues, a strong role of the UN, of an international body for security in preventing and intervening, and valorization of regional contributions, valorization of all set of instruments that we have in this direction. Don't forget, the UN at origin was conceived exactly this way. Was not a kind of world government like it can appear today that takes care of all issues. Was focused on the issue of war and peace, the issue of security and, let's call it the monopoly of force, the final end of all wars, the prohibition of wars. A new UN, a reconstructed UN, should be stronger and smaller than the one that we have now. Stronger in the sense that its core mandate should be strengthened radically with a big rapid reaction force that is half permanent, managed by the future Council of Peace, I call it, the new and how to get there, the transition, how to get this order, can be much easier and quicker than we imagine. It depends not from the obvious opposition of the United States and European countries. Depends very much on the willingness to organize the situation in this way. And China has a really crucial role in that because China is the leader of the Global South. In terms of vote in the General Assembly, Global South is overwhelming. Transition means a meeting of the General Assembly divided into two parts. In the first, there is the resignation from the organization by almost all countries. The same session, there is a second part in which the General Assembly of the countries that resigned declare their self-constituent assembly. This is an extremely technical and political point that must be considered because the chart established very clearly there are 5 articles in the chart that impede any reform. So only resignation from the existing body can solve the issue. Then a constituent assembly comprised by the same countries that start to build the new UN on reformed, changed chart that codify the new strategy, as I say, war and peace issue, security, world security issue, preventing aggression, and a more limited number of additional mandates. Existing bodies like development body, cultural bodies, big organizations, humanitarian bodies, and so on, could continue, but with a much looser relationship with the UN, because the world has changed in 8 years. Now we have a new.
Professor Pino, I think you made the point clear because some of these points were already taken. I appreciate your answer. Also, for the limitation of time, we thank you very much for providing this answer. In the meantime, Professor George Katrougalas has joined us. We are honored to have you, though a bit late. I think we can give you the word now because I guess you have to go back to do some work. Professor Katrougalas is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece and also UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic international order. Thank you very much for joining us. Please, you may take the...
Many thanks for giving me the floor. Many thanks to the organizers for inviting me. And apologies for joining late and not being able to follow you till the end. This is the day of my courses. I commute to go to my courses and my flight had a delay. So a lot of obstacles, but not enough to prohibit me from being with you, which is really a pleasure and an honor. I agree with most of that my predecessor, my previous speaker has said about how we need a reform of the international institutional structure, and also that international law legality, I would add, is at a crossroads. We have seen a genocide unraveling in Gaza without the United Nations to be able to stop it. We have seen something even worse. Israel, the party that was responsible for this genocide, to mock the institutions of the United Nations. Prime Minister Netanyahu to call the United Nations the House of Darkness and a swab of anti-Semitism. And for the first time, the General Secretary of the United Nations himself to be declared persona non grata. This goes much beyond, however, the genocide of Gaza. The stalemate in the Security Council has prohibited the United Nations from playing the role that it has been envisaged in the Charter. I remind you, with the words of the first General Secretary, that this role is not to bring heaven in earth, he has said. The role of the United Nations is to avoid the hell to get loose in our world. And in many aspects, this is a failure. Another clear failure is what's happening at the level of the international economic order. The new international economic order, as a kind of demand, together with the right to development, have been the main, let's say, ways that the Global South has transformed the international law. Again, I must remind you that the right to self-determination was not enshrined fully, neither in the Charter nor at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had to wait till 1963 for the two covenants of human rights to have a full, let's say, enshrinement in international law. And of course, this happened because the anti-colonial struggle has played an important transformative role on the international law. However, these demands have not fulfilled, quite the opposite. We had the first North-South summit in Cancun in 1981. Thatcher and Reagan came to this summit and practically hijacked it. We had a new economic international order in the 80s, but it was quite the opposite than this envisaged by the leaders of the Global South. It was a neoliberal economic order. And we still see this economic order to be shaped by two powerful currents contrary to the will and the interests of the big majorities. First, the legacy of colonialism. We have deep embedded structural drivers that perpetuate inequalities between the Global South and, let's say, the Global North or the West. In addition, we have an institutional financial architecture based on the Bretton Woods institutions that substantially, essentially, rigs the state of the play. Just have in mind that the G7, the wealthy Western states, although they represent less than 10% of the population, control 41% of the votes, both in the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. On the contrary, the majority of the global population, the global south, controls less than 10% of the voting. China has less votes than Japan, although both in population and in economic size, it's much, much bigger. India, which is the most populated country in the world, is just 13th. So we are in an urgent need to reform this international architecture. It is really a pity that Europe is not participating. Actually, sometimes it is an impediment to this effort. I'm really worried on the rise of the party of the war in our continent. There are voices, official voices, that declare that the next war is not just imminent, it is unavoidable. We need to have, together with the movement for a more equitable, more fair economic international order, also a new movement for peace and against the war. A last point I have to make is that in this struggle, we are not in a position, let's say, of weakness. China, which is indeed leading the global south, has promoted a very good number of ideas. Recently, the Global Governance Initiative. But my point is that we are in a global majority, not just because the countries of the south represent the big majority of the human population. As one United Nations text has said, there is also a south in the north. That is, in our societies, the 90% of the population is not profiting from this version of globalization. The interests of the 90% of our societies are the same with the interests of the global south. And this, in my understanding, gives us, let's say, a feeling of optimism. Generally, in dire times, optimism is a moral obligation, not to surrender to, let's say, the forces that want us to lose any kind of hope. But my point is that it's not just, let's say, a wish. It is an objective reality that the interests of the huge majority, the global majority, are at this time aligned with the interests of the global south. That is, many thanks for hearing me.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was a great pleasure to listen to you. I think many of your points align with the general discussion we have had today, although you were not present, but some of the points you made are very, very important, and it's right to the point on we have problems with the structural issues of both the United Nations itself, but also the world order itself today does not reflect the realities of the world. We have enormous inequality and lack of representation of the global south in the governance order. And I think this is very, very important, but also you pointed out that we should not lose hope in the face of militarism and securitization of our societies these days. War is not inevitable. We can, because we might disagree, there is no objective reality. Everything is subjective in a sense. How we look at the world and how we shape the world is very, very subjective, and it depends on the kinds of ideas we carry within us, which is very fascinating. Thank you very much for taking the time. I hope you can stay with us.
I have to leave you.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you took the time to speak to us. Thank you very much. I don't know if Mr. Wang wants to comment on our previous discussion or the question of the restructuring of the world order. and the United Nations itself? Or should we take next questions? You was muted, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to add a few comments. So about the new type international relations. So China would like to build up. It's based on three principles. That is mutual respect, justice, and fairness, and also cooperation and win-win. So at the recently concluded the fourth plenary of the 20th CPC Central Committee. So we have outlined, actually, so the leadership, the Chinese leadership has outlined a blueprint for China's economic and social development in the next 5 years, as I mentioned just now. But not only for the domestic affairs of China, but also it has outlined a blueprint for China's foreign affairs, foreign policy. So it means China is now committed to exercise the Chinese modernization. Now we are walking on the road, so aiming to the Chinese modernization. And in this process, we will continuously advocate high quality opening up. And as I said just now, China steadily, so walking on the road of high quality opening up, will continuously adhere to the true multilateralism and adhere to the UN Charter and the principles. And we strongly believe and stands that the United Nations shall be at the core of the international relationship. In this way, we would like to join hands with the countries of the world. So on the basis of the three principles, like mutual respect, the justice and the fairness, and cooperation and the win-win. So to build a future, a shared future of common destiny for the humanity. And so we would to see more progress, more development, more prosperity of the world. And all in all, so we would like to have common development through China's development. And there is one message, a very strong message from the recently concluded the meeting of the CPC Central Committee is that the China's new development will bring new opportunity for the world. And that's what China will make its every best and efforts towards this aim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. This is very important. I think China's greatest contribution to global peace is economic development and progress. And the Belt and Road Initiative is the most important aspect of that. That's why we are here in Sweden, although we are not officially part of the Belt and Road, we are promoting the Belt and Road as a vehicle for peace and security in the world. In the meantime, we were joined by Professor Wang Yiwei from Beijing. He is the director of the Center of European Studies at Renmin University. And I welcome you. We have had discussions. Now we are mixing the Q&A session with presentations because some of our guests had some obstacles attending, but we keep recording the session, and I would like to invite Dr. Wang Yiwei to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I always online listen your presentation because you put me in the observer, so I cannot join. I show my face. The quick response to one panelist mentioned about the military parade in September 3rd. I think if you learn the lessons, even in the war, Ukraine war, the West looked down upon to Russia and punished Russia, and then maybe miscalculate the situation, and then maybe strong response from Russia side. So there's a war. Even previous time in the World War I, World War II, also punished Germany and caused more conflicts. So this time, China learned the lessons to show so advanced weapons, and all made in China. And the systematic advance is not just a single one or some of one. And also all the major combat weapons, not just in a laboratory, to stop the war. Anybody want to make China involved any war to beat China is unthinkable. So that's reason to make peace. If you read Mozi in the warring state, Mozi is one of the great thinkers during the warring state. There's two states, like Qi want to invade Luguo, and he showed all the countermeasures to the commander-in-chief of the Qi. Whatever way you will attack me, I have the countermeasures, defeat you. So you stop to invade the Qi, Luguo. So that's I think is make peace. So it's a 兼爱非攻击 universal love and no violence. Very famous philosopher of the Mozi. So I think that's kind of the philosopher of China's military parade. And the second about the reform the United Nations. Some panelists say not reform, you need a revolution. We don't want a revolution. China benefit from the opening and the reform, right? If revolution, that means war. World War II, on the ash of the World War II, so that's the birth of the United Nations. If you say revolution, you need a World War III to rebuild a new United Nations. The casualties so high, given that we have nuclear weapons, and even the casualties in the Ukraine war is millions of the casualties. Is for the consideration of the sustainable development of the human civilization, the humanitarian. I think we should avoid World War III, reform the United Nations, not to rebuild a new United Nations on the ash of the war or conflicts. So China put forward so far the 4 global initiatives. And maybe next year or 2 years later, China will put forward the 5th one. It's my understanding because the Chinese philosopher is Wu Xing, the 5 basic elements of the universe, right? It's from the gold, water, fire, and earth, and also wood. So I think I'm publishing an article to explain that. And President Xi Jinping also said there are 5 deficits in the world: the deficit of the development, the security, peace, governance, and trust. Maybe the fifth global initiative is global initiative for trust. People don't trust each other, supply chain, everything. And then I think why China put forward these five global initiatives? It's an initiative, firstly. It's not China. It's different, like a proposal by China, but everything should work to make the United Nations more representatives and more authoritative and more efficient. For the representatives, because the United Nations found founding member only 51, so far the 193. So we let the Global South have more voices heard. One panelist correctly pointed out that India, even China, less than representative in IMF, World Bank, right? Then Japan is unfair, right? Secondly, make the United Nations more efficient. So not just empty talking. And in this regard, we should limit the veto power to use. The United States uses hundreds of times of veto power for either for Israel or for United States itself. China used 16 times, 8 times for maybe Syria and for other countries, not for China. So we need to control the using of the veto power, and otherwise the UN resolution not work, right? And thirdly, make the United Nations more authoritative. You can say, oh, United Nations cannot solve the problems, so we build a coalition of willing and then the rules-based international order. The only rules is UN Charter and the international law. If you build your alliance and then say this is the rules and let other people to say accept this is unfair. So in the Chinese eyes, 193 members all on the table, and then problems on the menu. So we jointly to find a solution. In Chinese, everybody understand there's a slogan say 办法总比困难多. The solution is always more than problems. If we can collectively, jointly consultate and learn from each other. So another saying is the Chinese saying 高手在民间. So global majority, they are silent, but they actually wisdoms made from them, not because we have more power, and then you can find the solution not necessary. So that's reason I think the four global initiatives plus maybe in the future global trust initiative will contribute. So that's my basically contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang. Thank you for bringing in some of the Chinese wisdom and philosophy, which is derived from its own history. You had long periods of wars and also long periods of prosperity, and you have a great memory in the mind of the Chinese people, which is very useful for the rest of the world too. I will stop the recording now because our presentations are made, and I will allow a more open